I have banished the male gaze from my life.
I can go with my dark circles. I don't have to put makeup on because everybody's doing that.
I've seen women in boardrooms just completely dominate conversations, and the confidence that they exude in their pantsuits was always something that just really, really fascinated me.
I almost started taking more care of myself physically in this time because it was no longer for an audience. It was just for the self.
In this post-pandemic world, how do we reimagine fashion? Have we lost some of our vanity, or have we become even more vain? At least those of us who are hunkered down in our homes and have pretty much no form of expression but social media. There's a lot of talk of ethical fashion, of sustainable fashion, but beyond these little neat labels, what do these words actually mean? And when seen through the lens of gender, have we managed to rid ourselves of the male gaze somewhat in the year of the pandemic, or are we exactly trapped where we were? On the Female Voice today, our special Changemaker series at We the Women, I've brought together 4 very, very interesting women, all very different, but all united by their ferocious individualism, their feistiness, and their, I would say, decision to live life on their own terms, which is always a guiding principle for the people we bring on this platform. And let me introduce all of them one by one. We're joined first by Karuna Izara Parekh. Karuna is a writer, a poet, and someone who has been advocating the cause of less is more for many years, even before it became fashionable. We're also joined by Manvi Gagru. Manvi is a great actor. You know her from many of your digital series, but also rather deliciously shamed a fashion label that was trying to fat shame her and other women. And I think all of us remember that as well. We're also joined by Aditi Meyer. Aditi Meyer is in California and has actually called out the cliche of sustainable fashion, arguing that till you actually talk about the rights of workers, it's no point talking about sustainable fashion. Nothing is sustainable just because you don't repeat your dresses if you're not paying attention to who's making your products, and what are the rights of those workers, those craftspeople who are actually putting the clothes on your body. And we're also joined by Sanjina Rishi. Sanjina is many things, but made the headlines when she wore a pantsuit to her wedding. So really, if you're talking about reimagining the Desi wedding, that happened right there. And I think, pantsuits are such a powerful visual statement, especially at a time when Kamala Harris is going to be the vice president, when Hillary Clinton wore them and got grief for it. So there's a lot of politics, I think, in what we wear and what we don't wear. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'll welcome everyone, and I'll start with you, Karuna. What has this year been like for you in terms of bothering even to dress up? I would be an exception, I guess, on this panel, because instead of being hunkered down, I traveled across India, but I found that my car had room for 1 gym bag. And in that gym bag, I carried 4 kurtas and 2 pairs of trousers. And most of the time, I couldn't even find a place to wash them. But for most people who had to stay at home, what happened to fashion? What happened to vanity? Did you find yourselves challenging all of your sort of preconceived notions? Did you find yourself changing? And just unmute yourself before you speak. Go ahead.
Hi, Barkha. Yeah, honestly, most of us had to be stuck home while watching you adventuring across the country. I was quite jealous on occasion. Honestly, I found something very interesting happen in the first few weeks of the lockdown of the pandemic. And I started noticing my Instagram flooded, the feed was flooded with selfies, and hundreds and thousands of selfies of people who were stuck at home and I guess had very little else to do. And I started pondering it, and I realized, as human beings, we really do, most of us have this giant urge to be seen, and that is very human. But I think in the digital age, as we know, that's taken on a kind of horrific twist where you don't just show yourself, you try and show your best self constantly. And initially, I found it extremely disturbing because, I was seeing an extraordinary amount of selfies of people, say, in their swimsuits at home, or in their underwear at home, and a real manic display. And that was a very disturbing thing initially. But there were many of us, I think, who came from the opposite end, where we felt relieved to not be seen after so long. And I think for many of us, especially working within this industry, it was so freeing to not have to be on display. And, I'm someone who's, well, I've not struggled with my body image. I'm comfortable with who I am and have come to terms with even my physicality a long time ago. But I almost started taking more care of myself physically in this time because it was no longer for an audience, it was just for the self. So I think we've seen a very interesting shift in some people, a different kind of shift in others. But I don't think anyone has been unscathed in some way by this pandemic in terms of our physicality and the display of it, and especially in terms of fashion, where and this is a whole different conversation, but where earlier it was very easy to say these are fashion images, these are the images in a magazine, these have been photoshopped, and we know these are celebrities. And now, because of apps like Facetune and because of social media, everyone is a celebrity, and everyone is out there photoshopping themselves and putting their best face forward, and it's not always their best face, So so I think we've seen a very interesting shift like that. I don't know how it's been for other people, but for me, it's been freeing in that way. Yeah.
I know what you mean, because in some ways the mask, was almost like a space for liberation. Like you didn't feel like the camera was on your face the whole time. One of your struggles may have also been that, on the one hand, you're sort of sustainable fashion advocate, an ethical fashion advocate. On the other hand, you're an influencer. You're an online influencer. People come to you to endorse their brands. You need to model clothes, you need to look stunning when you do that. Is there a conflict for you? And I think that's a question that applies, I guess, to all of you. Is there a conflict for you in being yourself and then also presenting a kind of constructed image that is, no matter whether you like it or not, seen through the male gaze?
Yeah, of course there is. I feel like I have banished the male gaze from my life. So for me it comes down to just the question of sustainability, and I'm not even interested in a male audience, frankly, at this point. But for me it does come down to the question of sustainability versus my work, and sometimes it is great conflict. But I try to do interesting things with it. So, for example, I during the Kerala floods, all the clothes that I had been gifted by designers and sent by brands and that I had modeled in the past, and I actually did a sale of all those clothes, and I sent all the money to the Kerala flood victims. And so I think there's ways that one can balance it out. Last year, I did 1 year of no shopping. Which actually I do think is the way forward. But we also need to look at the history of handcrafts and whether we want that industry to die. So I think it's a very delicate balance. I try and find a middle path through it all. And I think we cannot ever discount that the fashion industry also gives us phenomenal amounts of art and creativity. And I think there's a nice way to meld that with sustainability, and I'm sure the other women here agree and have explored that as well in fantastic ways. I've seen some of your work, guys.
Yeah, I think you make the interesting point that to shun fashion totally, such as it is, might mean that you're hurting an entire sort of industry. You're hurting the arts, right? So it's a complicated, it's a complicated position. But at the same time, Manvi, how's this year been for someone like you? Again, you're an actor, right? And people are lapping up for more shots. They're lapping up all the sort of other work that you're doing. But at the same time, you are, and I know you to be this, you speak your mind. You did not pause for 1 second before a fashion label actually had a caption on a dress that you were wearing saying, this dress will help you hide your curves. You made the fashion label then withdraw, apologize, right? You said, I don't want to hide my curves. But we're still talking about women in terms of whether they have curves or not, right? We're still putting pressure, whether you're hiding them or you're displaying them, you're still deconstructing with a bloody pandemic on. I mean, I'm not saying this necessarily happened when we were, we were in the middle of this, but even with the pandemic on, we're still deconstructing women in terms of their body type. So I'm just wondering how this year has been for you, what it's done in terms of your relationship with your body, your relationship with your self-image, your relationship with your mind, your relationship with how you look at yourself. Go ahead.
Barkha, what's interesting is that, so anyway, even before the pandemic actually began full blown, there was this, and I saw this around myself, not just within me, that there was this sense of, the marriage of well-being with beauty standards. So there was more emphasis on that always. And I mean, it was beginning to gain momentum. And then with the pandemic, I think that just got strengthened. So like, I mean, it became about focusing on well-being rather than just outward beauty or just superficial beauty. So for me personally, that aspect became the forefront, because suddenly I realized that I had all the time in the world. Like I had no excuses anymore. And I also, in general, like the journey that at least the first 2-3 months of the pandemic were, I mean, there was a lot of introspection. There was a lot of, I live alone. I stayed in Mumbai only, and I was living alone. I was doing everything by myself, and obviously there was no stepping out and all of that. And that's when I sat with myself, and you realize that, I mean, there's so many things that you're able to tune out the noise, I felt. And I was very happy being away from social media, or at least reducing my time there. So suddenly I felt that, okay, I mean, even the connection of mind and body, that was strengthened, I felt. So there was more emphasis on working out, not because I want to look thinner or even look fitter, but actually be fitter. Because I mean, there's and I mean, I know it's a cliche and everybody knows that, but no, you have to experience it. You have to experience working out on a day that you're feeling low, and then feeling better because of the endorphins after the workout, and only then you realize just how powerful those things are. Even food. So I'd done a course of Vipassana last year, and this is I mean, and the one thing that I carried from it, and I hope to keep practicing, that is just your diet, and how much it affects the mood you're in. You don't have to you don't have to change your diet, or if you don't want to, but just see the link. Like once you notice that link, every time if you're upset or angry or irritable or snappy, you'll notice that you've either not eaten for a really long time, or you've eaten something junk. Just notice that. Or I've seen that. If I've eaten a lot of junk food, and and not had enough water and things like that, and suddenly the next day I'll be super irritable, and you sometimes don't even realize why you're being like this, because there's no particular trigger, but you're just so that connection between the mind and body is something that I experienced firsthand. And like that idea has solidified in me, and I keep like telling everybody that also. And in general, what was happening in the world, especially our country, you felt like there's so many things that are not in your control, like and we are constantly bogging ourselves down with controlling things around us. The only thing that is in our control is our this, from top to bottom, which includes everything, which includes your physicality, which includes your mind, which includes your emotions. But that's literally the only thing that is in your control, and that should be in your control. I mean, make sure that you have absolute control on that. So that's my big learning in this aspect.
Did you find that you had shifted or changed in any fundamental way in terms of feeling freer from other people's opinion of you. I think what I heard Karuna really say was that in a sense, there's a kind of letting go, right? In my case, I can tell you it happens with age. One of the stunning things about growing older, I'm in my 40s now. I mean, I'm 48. And one of the things is that at 48, I was always ferociously independent, but at 48, I feel like even more unapologetic than I was in my 30s, if that's possible, right? I'm just wondering if there has been that sense of liberation. For some people, it's been the opposite. For some people, it's been anxiety. It's been hanging on to everything they have. It's been wanting certitude. For some people, it's been embracing the lack of certitude. Which one has it been for you?
For me, it's been actually, again, like you said, Barkha, for me also, it's never been about what other people are thinking, or even if I'm wearing an uncomfortable dress, it's because I like that dress. It's not because someone else thinks it looks nice on me. It's because I like that dress. It's fine if I have to suck my stomach in and not breathe or whatever. But it's coming because I want to do it. But yes, I agree, there was a sense of complete freedom. But for me, it was more about not having to worry. There was like not having to worry about the clock, I mean, I had nowhere to be. I mean, there was just that sense of peace. And so everything I was doing it on my own terms. Like I would work out at 2 in the night. Once I worked out at 2 in the night only because I could, because I was like, who's gonna stop me? Like I just there was that sense of calm or peace of not having to rush anywhere, not having to not be bound by timelines. In terms of personal vanity, yes, there is a sense of like I can I can go with my dark circles. I don't have to put makeup on because everybody's doing that. Everybody around you is doing that, and there's a sense of solidarity, like global solidarity. The biggest of celebrities are sitting at home and washing dishes and cleaning the house and stuff. So there was that which was fun for a while initially. I'm sure you remember the first month there was a lot of these videos where people are cooking. I mean, celebrities are cleaning their house and they're making videos around that and this and that. So everybody enjoyed that. But then even the fashion industry kind of adapted to that, and suddenly, like initially the masks also, for example, the masks that we were getting initially were utility based, that there's 3 layer of protection, it's breathable, it's reusable, washable, all of that. But suddenly it became about aesthetics. After the first 2 months, it became about aesthetics of, is it matching your outfit? If you're taking a picture for Instagram, is it pretty? Is it printed? Is it color block? What is it? Then you have those chain things now, which is amazing. Like, you have this chain mask with the chain, so you can just hang it and it looks pretty and it's cool and all of that. And I was just actually, I honestly was wondering about human adaptability at that stage. I was like, wow, fashion is like, as an industry, like, look at this. They didn't think twice before jumping onto this. And suddenly eye makeup became a big thing. DIY videos about skincare routines became a big thing. And I was like, and I was actually, like I said, in it, I was in that state of, I'm just going to enjoy it. Like, I'm just going to stay at home, like do things at my pace. And suddenly I was looking at people churning out content like this. And I was like, and I really wanted to like hold them, shake them, saying, guys, breathe, like, relax. You've been given this time. Just, just exhale and spend time with yourself. Because I was feeling that pressure. Initially, I was feeling that pressure. I'm like, why is everybody churning out content like this? And should I also be doing it? Should I also be putting out like these, reels where I click and suddenly my outfit changes and those things? And I'm like, no, I can't, I can't be bothered. Like, or if I feel like it, like there are days when I feel like, okay, dressing up just for myself, then I'll take pictures and put them up or whatever. So but I have become far more comfortable with the idea of just doing things on my own, for myself, and all of that. Yeah.
But I'm going to actually push you all on this point that Karuna and you have made about being freer, because it's my feeling, and we'll come back to this, it's my feeling that when we live a reality mediated by, let's say, social media, we are still living via filters, whether they're our own filters or whether they're other people's filters. So we can explore that a little bit more. But I want to bring in Aditi and Sanjina now. And Aditi, when I was listening to Manvi talk about masks, I know that on your website, one of the passionate points that you've made is that before you wear these masks, please think about who's making them. Please think about whether the people making them are safe. Please think about, you might be wearing a PPE and putting that mask on, but what is happening to the workers? And your focus on sustainable fashion has long been driven by the rights of workers. And I think you've made the argument that otherwise it's one big fat cliche. So I know you're bringing us a perspective from California. Your parents were from Punjab. You're Indian American now. Tell us a little bit about how the same debate is playing out there and how it's playing out for you personally.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because I think the mainstream narrative around sustainability and sustainable fashion, for the most part, became something you had to buy into, right? Sustainability being something you buy. And, as much as it is important to bring up the conversation around conscious consumerism, the more we make the sustainable fashion movement rooted in voting with their dollar, the more we limit who can engage with this movement and how we engage with this movement. So for me, my relationship with sustainability has always been from a grassroots perspective and thinking more about the soul of sustainability. And so with the introduction of the pandemic, it's been especially interesting because you had a complete halt of business as we know it. And I think the industry is under a contraction in many ways right now, fashion and beyond, and under a point of reimagination because they're realizing that, COVID hit. And garment workers around the world were the first to be affected in terms of like what you expect, the most marginalized communities not being paid, despite being the heart of the industry. We saw the fact that folks were kind of reorienting their relationship with consumption. On one hand, you had folks that were, engaging in retail therapy, and then other folks realizing, well, who am I dressing for? And kind of contending with their closet. So it also showed us the soul of sustainability of what you're able to do with the resources that you have, which I think is a narrative of sustainability that I always like to push. As far as my own personal work, I do a lot of organizing here in downtown Los Angeles, where we have a huge garment sector. The second biggest industry in Los Angeles is our cut and sew garment industry. And so here we also see sweatshop conditions where we have a largely undocumented workforce that are already working in sweatshop conditions pre-COVID, making often 2 to 3 cents per piece because there is a piece rate here in Los Angeles as opposed to the minimum wage. And so when COVID hit, suddenly garment workers were considered essential workers without any of the protections from the state or financial safety nets. So we've had outbreaks of COVID in factories here. We've had instances of garment workers who are making PPE material not even be given masks themselves, no social distancing practices. So it's been a very interesting time of just all these social inequalities being unmasked, right? And so on one hand, we have the fashion scene where folks, as Mani was saying, are kind of engaging with like the aesthetics of masks. But on the other hand, the heart of the fashion industry and the drivers of the fashion industry in terms of the garment workers are becoming more and more displaced. And so it's been interesting for me as someone that is constantly straddling between these two worlds of a labor organizer and labor rights activist, but also within the influencing and sustainable fashion space. I also think within the digital landscape, influencers are forced to contend with the state of the world in a way that they weren't before. To now go on a vacation and post a golden hour selfie is tone deaf. So I think people are, having to speak on the socio-political climate, but that requires really knowing what's going on. So I think there's been a resurgence of folks looking for authentic voices and thought leaders during this time as well.
Would it be fair then to say, look, fashion has always been political in the deepest sense. The beauty myth, the beauty burden, whatever you want to call it, has always been deeply political. But I think after the pandemic, it is a very political conversation.
Mm.
Would you agree?
Yes, most definitely. I think that the pandemic, for me, I've been in this work for about 7 years, and I've always had a political lens in terms of understanding the fashion industry. And I think with the pandemic and all these social inequalities being exposed to the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement here in the US as well, we have seen the fashion industry is contending with everything from internal diversity and inclusion to how their supply chains operate. So the politics are more clearer than ever. And it's that balance, right? Because at the end of the day, I acknowledge the ways that fashion is art, especially when we're talking about the artisan sector. But on the other hand, there's this hyper commercial fashion industry that is predicated on this aspirational image and has been the driver of things like fat phobic industry, Eurocentric beauty, promoting colorism in terms of who they choose to represent. And so all of those things are being interrogated. And I think fashion has become the vehicle through which people are understanding these issues. And in my own personal work, I could tell you I've seen my audience double in the last few months because this conversation is now being taken so seriously. Whereas before, conversations of race within the fashion and sustainability movement were often seen as distractions. But now we're seeing this framework of intersectionality that looks at class, socioeconomic status, gender, and race are key factors that inform our relationship, not only to fashion, but to labor, the environment, and so much more, and how social justice is environmental justice, and how all of those things kind of intersect once you really understand how these systems operate.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think I don't remember the last time in India someone actually, sat and said, okay, this is my sari, this is my dress, who made it, how much are they being paid, how much of the profit that a designer is making actually went to the worker behind it. And these are all really, important questions. Sanjina, did you expect to make the kind of headlines you did when you had a simple, I think, 11-person wedding ceremony? So that in itself was obviously militated against the idea of the big fat Indian wedding. But then you did a kind of pantsuit instead of a lehenga. My friend Manish Malhotra or Sabyasachi Mukherjee must be like, oh my God, this could put us out of business, right? Like if everybody starts doing this, just pulling out, the stuff that they already have in their wardrobe. That pantsuit wasn't even bought for the wedding. You already owned it, right? You already possessed it. And what were you trying to make a statement of some kind, a political statement, or was it just?
I definitely wasn't trying to make any kind of statement. The suit is actually a secondhand garment, and I love shopping secondhand. And I wanted my my outfit to represent who I was. It wasn't about, and a lot of people were sort of commenting on my Instagram saying, "Oh my goodness, like you will never appreciate a lehenga or a sari," which is pretty ridiculous because if you go through any of my pictures, I absolutely love wearing lehengas. I love wearing saris, but a 10 kg lehenga just didn't make sense for the occasion. And, I think I put together a look that was very much me, and I loved it. And I was able to wear things that were given to me by people that I loved. And that was just an amazing experience. And so I didn't expect it to be this statement. But when it, sort of went viral is when I really realized also how privileged I am that I didn't have to give it a second thought. And so this is something that I've been talking about a lot, is there are many women who, have been brought up in a way or have been told that, this is a family decision that's made for you and not one that's necessarily reflective of your individual, aesthetic at all. So I think that was really shocking for me. I didn't realize that it would be offensive to anyone. And it seems to have offended people to the level where they were saying, culture ko expose nahi kar sakte, to badnaam mat karo at least. And all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it was really ridiculous, the kind of hate comments I was getting. And, I would add that men wear Western suits to Indian weddings all the time. And, I was watching Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, which is like probably the quintessential Indian wedding movie. That's where we get our songs and our concepts. But even in that, on both of his weddings, this guy was wearing a suit, and no one would ever question his cultural loyalty in the way that people came for me and said, this is colonialism. This is, you're trying so hard to be Western. A funny thing to say in English while you're probably sitting there in t-shirt and jeans, it's, so yeah, I didn't expect to make any kind of statement, but I'm sort of glad I did, because I had I had a lot of women reach out to me and say, "Oh, you've given me the strength to stand up to my in-laws," and I'm thinking, "Wow, that's amazing," but also, "Oh my God, I'm causing problems in families across India."
So, you set out to just wear what you wanted to, and as you wrote on your Instagram, you sort of pieced together your wedding outfit, begging, borrowing, stealing, and maybe buying only just a little bit. But in
Yeah.
the end, that pantsuit did become a statement, and it became a statement against the backdrop of the conversation that's happening around women globally. And I remember Hillary Clinton. I was interviewing her once, and she said to me that there is no time that the media will write about me without saying Hillary
What
Clinton, and
shoes
then
I'm wearing? Yeah.
yes, the parenthesis is always what she's wearing, whether she's having a bad hair day, and some smarmy little comment on her pantsuit. And Kamala Harris has also embraced a certain look in a way that is very individual. For example, the refusal to wear heels, right? To wear those sneakers with whatever else she's wearing, often in trousers, not necessarily playing to a prototype of what is considered feminine in the cliched way, right? I'm just wondering how the politics of the pantsuit plays out for you personally, Sanjina.
I mean, I love I've always loved a pantsuit, and I also come from personally the backdrop of corporate America. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Go ahead.
So I come from corporate America, where I've seen women in boardrooms just completely dominate conversations, and the confidence that they exude in their pantsuits was always something that just really, really fascinated me. And I wore pantsuits myself, so I didn't think twice before bringing it into my own personal style. So I do wear pantsuits quite regularly to casual occasions. So there definitely is a political conversation there as well, where any woman in a pantsuit is kind of inherently subversive, because she's wearing something that is traditionally been a male-dominated garment, but also she is probably in a space that has been traditionally reserved for men. So I love that. I do love the fact that it is a little bit tongue-in-cheek subversive.
It's kind of how short hair used to be at
Exactly.
one point.
Yeah.
And I remember when for most of my life, I wore my hair shorter than it is now. And the number of comments on that short hair, and and as in India, it used to be called a boy cut, right? So that kind of says everything about its politics. Now, I want to enter a more complex part of the conversation, which is the constructed image, which is that even when we think we are throwing off the shackles, and I'll start with you, Karuna, even when we think we're breaking free from the chains, we're doing this for ourselves, we're not doing this for men, we're not doing this for the world, we're doing it for ourselves, but we are living in a constantly filtered reality, Karuna, and we've all become those people who want our photographs taken in better light. We may be able to lose the makeup, but we have not necessarily been able to lose the constructed image of ourselves, even if we're doing it for ourselves, even if it's the self-image that's playing out. This kind of scary virtual reality that now defines us, right? Because tactile is less in the year of the pandemic, and anyway, generationally, it was already less. I'm just wondering how you, as a thinking person, deal with what's real and what's constructed.
It is so complicated, and I think each of us here probably deal with it in our own work. And honestly, when I was listening to each of you speaking, I could hear that as well. Like, for example, I wore a pantsuit not to my wedding, but to my wedding reception, and I was thinking about that as I was hearing you speak, Sanjana, and I was thinking about how even while making the decision to do it, I was already predicting the things people would say or feel or think. So, we are, whether it's a male gaze or not, we are never kind of devoid of the gaze. And I think that of course has been exacerbated so much by social media, because earlier it was just, the circle of people you'd meet or encounter. And now it is a life on constant display. Even Manvi's comments about body shaming or about health, and all of it is displayed, all of it. And it's there is this joke that goes around now. It's like, if it's not on the gram, did it even happen? And I think we're all familiar with that sentiment. And it is so very damaging to our sense of self. So, on a personal level, I do a lot to keep it real. And I think we have to constantly hold ourselves up to a sort of, I want to say, higher standard without sounding condescending, but it is a higher standard. And I mean that on a very personal level. It's just a higher, freer, coming back to that word free, a freer way of thinking. And, I have a friend who's a brilliant author, Zeba Tarkani, and she speaks about radical self-love. And she says that radical self-love is not the same as self-love. We think of self-love as a pedicure or a massage, but the concept of radical self-love is actually freeing the mind and freeing yourself off the idea of that constant gaze that we all live under, thanks to this social media world that we all occupy. And we can't deny that, social media for most of us, all of us, I think, sitting here, has been the platform for our voices. It has amplified our work. There are so many positives to it, and we can't deny that. But how do we put the work out and yet, remain sort of distant from the constant gaze or the constant judgment, and to continue to produce work from a spirited place without and take a bit of the criticism, but not enough to have it affect you constantly. It is such a delicate balance, and a constant struggle, actually, for even someone like me who's constantly working against that. I, on a personal level, I do a lot to fight it. I keep a private account with only about, I think, 30 of my family and friends, and I keep that very tight, and no one knows the name of that account. No one knows how to find me there. And I keep checking between the two and see what am I putting out on this account and what am I putting out on my public account, and how different are the two. I think it's important to fact check yourself. Other things, I think, I have some rules for myself in my own shoots. I ask myself constantly, how much has this been photoshopped? How different does it look from the original image? I do not allow anyone to change the shape of my body in an image. I might choose the nicest picture of myself to put out, but it is still the picture that was taken. And I do think that there is something to be said for recognizable filters versus filters that are not actually, and that's very dangerous right now, I feel. And the pandemic has, of course, pushed that idea, because we're not being seen in person, so this is the only image we're putting out of ourselves. And I keep telling friends of mine, it's important you don't fall for yourself. Don't fall for your own bullshit. So it is, like I said, a fine balance. Other things, to just speak about Aditi's work a little bit, I, that's something else I've started holding myself accountable for. If I'm working with a brand, I think, especially in the time of the pandemic, where the distance between the haves and the have-nots has become so very large. And I think the failings of the worst governments on this planet have really come to light, because it is when pushed against the wall and in times of crisis that we see how our governments really function. It's not at the best of times, it is at the worst of times that we see that. And so I think it's been very important to ask, okay, if I am working with someone, what are they doing for other people? What are they doing for the greater good of the world? And I think that's a question that has come up so much in everyone's lives. Forget about just our work. I don't think, all those images of migrant workers across India, BLM, seeing what the protests in Poland, we're seeing such anger around the planet. We're seeing people really fighting for something. And I think a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and the kind of mentality and the kind of the thirst for life that we all have and the kind of life that we all want. So I think that's reflected in my work for sure, where I'm asking myself, who are you associating with, and what does your work say more and more? So yeah, sorry, I think I answered much more than the question you asked.
No,
but,
no, that was very interesting, because I was actually connecting it to what Aditi was saying earlier about, even for influencers like today, posting pictures of the sort of sun-kissed beach holiday is a bit sort of, to put it politely, out of sync with everything that's happening around us, right? And I mean, personally speaking, I remember, because I think about 2 months of my traveling went literally with walking with migrant workers, right? As they were walking, no
Yes.
one was telling their stories. And it seemed almost entirely irrelevant to me what I was wearing, whether it had mud on it, whether my kajal was smeared. It just seemed so irrelevant. There's a kind of relativity that entered our universes that didn't exist before. And Manvi, let me ask you: is there something today that you would tell your younger self, having lived this year, that you would have done earlier, maybe unthinkingly, maybe without even knowing, that you would not do today? I mean, Photoshop is an obvious example. Fairness products are other obvious examples. But our relationship with ourselves, our bodies, our self-image, our filtered reality is a very complex one, right? And I actually understand what Karuna is saying, that we still may want the best picture of ourselves, but we don't want, like, I don't want my skin to look white when it's brown. Just to give you an example, right? I may not want terrible lighting that makes it look worse than it is, but I don't want it to look a color that it's not in real life. So just to give that as an example. So, is there something today that you would say, I do not want to do this anymore? This makes me in particular very uncomfortable.
So definitely there's with respect to my body. I mean, I don't. In fact, one thing with in my relationship with social media, I've learned to disengage to a very large extent. I have learned to now when even if I don't read all the comments, but if I am, then it's like a third person. It's not Manvi reading the comments. Because there's another thing you'll notice, Barkha, like when during this pandemic, when we called our friends or family and we were on a video call, we didn't put makeup on for that. Like I have had conversations with my friends with my hair oiled and just woken up from sleep or whatever. So obviously there is a sense of comfort, or there is a sense of no judgment, safe space that we feel with our friends and family. So that judgment is something that I've somehow I would like to believe I've managed to remove entirely from my life, or at least I've gotten better at it. So one is that acknowledgement. I feel like, not just to my younger self. One thing I'd like to tell younger girls now who've grown up with social media is that please acknowledge the fact that this is not even their reality. So if someone is putting up a sunset picture of, forget the tone deafness of it, but it's not like they're living in Maldives, or please understand it's a paid promotion. Please understand that this is their job, and all of that. So there's the realization of that. There is also, in terms of filtered content, I just feel, from the basic level of the definition of filtered, I'm showing you what I want to show you. Period. I'm not showing you everything, right? I'm not showing you. I show nothing about my personal life, and in fact, I also have a private account, like Karuna was mentioning, where I put up pictures with my friends, with my family, if I'm dating somebody, if I'm going out for drinks, whatever. And my public account is strictly for, and unfortunately or fortunately, because during the pandemic, post the first 2-3 months, the shoots hadn't begun. So we were a lot of the money that I was making was through brand collaborations, was through influencer activities. So I try to have some ethical existence when it comes to that, in terms of, again, like I try not to endorse brands that aren't my understanding of sustainability and conscious fashion is very, very amateurish and is very nascent. But like I remember I did this whole thing, I ran this campaign with a publication where I talked about how when because a lot of brands keep sending you things, right? And their packaging is all plastic. So even the most, sometimes sustainable brands or eco-friendly brands are sending you things in plastic. And I did this whole social media thing where I told, I was talking about the brands, I was like, at least in your packaging, because packaging industry is something which is so, and now with e-commerce going up, there's so much emphasis on that. With the pandemic, I think in general, environmental causes have taken a huge hit, because if you see, you have those disposable masks just thrown around. You have PP plastic from the PPE kits. If you go to an airport, they give you those visors and a PPE kit and gloves and everything, and people have just thrown, like, it's just, there's so much plastic around, so we while on one hand there were no vehicles and there was like anyway, sorry, this is what I've gone into some other conversation, but coming back to what I would like to tell my younger self would be that there's really beauty in everyone, and I feel that, like, even that's why representation matters. Like, I remember when Kamala Harris, for example, when she became the vice president, Mindy Kaling had tweeted that I showed Kamala Harris's picture to my 2-year-old, 3-year-old daughter, and I said, look, she looks like us, and that was such a lovely thing, that because it matters. I didn't have any plus size actresses growing up. In fact, if there were any plus size actresses, they were hugely criticized for being plus size actresses. Like when if Madhuri Dixit would put on weight, it would make headlines. But there were male actors roaming around with paunches and romancing girls who are their daughter's age, or all of that was happening. So I mean, there's so much I'd like to tell my younger self. Actually, there's so much I feel I've learned and I've grown, and as it should be. So yeah, I mean, just like, you need to learn to just tune out this judgment and and see the futility of it. And even in fact, what Aditi was saying, the relationship with consumption has changed. I feel in general, I've realized there's so much you can do with such little stuff. Like, you don't need like a whole room full of makeup and or shoes or bags or all of those things. So yeah, just
I was talking earlier this week to Masaba Gupta on the same platform, and one of the things that she said was that if women have a sense of purpose, that actually liberates you a lot from how much focus you would place on how you look, because immediately the confidence that you derive from that central purpose, is somehow very liberating. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to say, especially if you couple it with being self-reliant economically. And I think, somehow those are the conversations that we do need to bring back, even about fashionable women. So let me just bring in Sanjina and Aditi into that. Sanjina, what would you not do today that you may have done 2 years ago?
I mean, stand in line for the H&M new drop, for example, is definitely something that I will never do again. I mean, this has been a really life-changing experience. And I was telling Karnaditi before this conversation got started that it was a period where, full-blown Fortune 500 companies had to deconstruct the way that they did business and kind of build it back up from the ground. So for me personally, it was a moment where I questioned every aspect of my life, and particularly my love for fashion and how that can exist in a world that is clearly suffering, at the human expense, and is clearly, doing better when humans lock themselves down and don't do anything. And so that's where my love for sustainability came from. And then, I also think that it's a lot about doing your own research. So, I was a lawyer, like I said, and well, I still am, but I learned to do a lot of research, and really deep research. So when, the things that Aditi talks about the colonial impact, about how can you say you're a sustainable brand if you do not treat your workers fairly? And I think that especially in India, where, on some level, the rest of the world relies on us to have lax environmental standards, to have lax labor standards. And they're actually profiteering off of our inability to take that kind of action. So I think even something like shopping at Zara or shopping at H&M, especially now that I've discovered so many homegrown Indian brands that are working in this space, I don't think I'll ever go back to that. And just, I think my journey is much newer than Karna's or Manvi's, but I will say that I don't have 2 separate accounts on Instagram. And in fact, I do put a lot of my absolutely real, unfiltered self, maybe not on my grid, but in my stories, for example. And what I found is that people in India now are beginning to react really, really positively to that. It's fine to have and that's how I've sort of managed that dilemma, which is I have this constructed reality because at the end of the day, this brand is relying on me to present them in the best light as well. But I mean, I'm a crazy person who has their own flaws and, doesn't always look perfect. And I like to put videos of myself being silly with my husband and, like making fun of him and doing all that kind of stuff. So, and I think that has really helped me. And of course, there are people, including my own friends, that are like, oh, this is too much, this is oversharing and so on and so forth. But, that is reality. And that's kind of how I feel better about the fact that I do feed into this kind of materialistic, consumption-driven, idea of fashion.
So I think what's complex for all of you is that unlike me, as Sanjina said, and I think quite honestly, you're also your business, or part of what you do, part of the work you do is also to promote brands, to promote a certain sort of idea of glamour. And so it's just much more complicated for you than it is for me, who can totally get away with never changing my khadi kurta. So it is simpler. But let me ask you, Aditi, in the end, beyond the politics of the rights of workers, what is it that we need to understand about ethical fashion? It's a word I almost prefer to sustainable, because it has to go beyond the formulaic. Yes, we care about, workers. We care about especially hand-woven fabric, which is a dying art. So there's an arts prism. There's a political and economic rights prism. And then there is a feminist prism. Right? And I'm just wondering how one regular person who's also dealing with 100 other things in her life manages to reach a self-image where, you look at your phone, you look at a picture of yourself and you say, okay, that's almost real. How do we get to almost real? Yes.
On social media? That is such an interesting question, because going back to what you were asking, Karuna, earlier, I, for one, think that as a society and as individuals, we have come to a point where we are prioritizing our digital selves over our real selves. And I can own that. It sucks. I think there's a lot of layers to that. For me, I can argue that I'm a storyteller, and Instagram is how I navigate capitalism. And this pandemic is one of the few, senses of community that we have, the need to be seen. I also love the element of curation, but I also think that we do need a level of radical vulnerability online. And I say that as someone that definitely does not do that. I am someone with the curated platform. When it comes to, influencers doing radical vulnerability, whose responsibility is that? I don't share anything personal. My work is all about decolonizing fashion and systemic understandings of issues. And so I think another interesting part of that is all the echo chambers and algorithms. We are presented with what we want to see, which is something that we really need to note. I also acknowledge that, like, the folks that I'm talking to some degree, I'm preaching to the choir, right? So really engaging, like, how do we expand this conversation? But it's so nuanced, right? Because I think on one hand, we talked about the male gaze and the ways that women, especially women of color, whether we like it or not, we are politicized or sexualized. So how do you also hone into the attention economy and use beauty to, maybe you'll follow me because you think you like my outfit, but I'll talk about the politics of labor or the environmental impact of fashion. So it's also, how do you kind of, hone in on the element of beauty? Something you also touched on, self-care. I think that has been really interesting in the age of social media, right? This commodification of self-care. Yes, I love a manicure. I love getting like makeup and stuff. But I think it's also important to note that self-care was at one point a radical feminist idea by the Black queer American writer and feminist Audre Lorde. And she talked about how caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, which is an act of political warfare. And so the fact that now it's like this, commodified thing, another tool of capitalism, there's a lot of things to interrogate here. So I don't know if I'm answering the questions. I think it's important to be critical of a system, but also understanding we're operating within it. And I have this a lot with capitalism, of understanding how the way that capitalism is operating on colonial modes of constant extraction and exploitation, the fashion industry is a prime example. But at the end of the day, I want to pay my bills, those brand partnerships are going to be there. And the brands that have the budgets to pay are not going to be the small, homegrown, sustainable brands. So it's like, how do we kind of embrace nuance? And how do we also have this conversation of when it comes to ethics and responsibility, especially in fashion, the onus shouldn't completely be on the consumer. You know, how do we talk about policies and governments and brands and the overarching nature of how we understand labor? There's a lot to interrogate here.
Well, we've been talking for almost an hour. It doesn't feel like that, but I think that this conversation raises more questions than it answers. And I think that this is a work in progress conversation. If there's any, I don't want to say something as banal as if there's anything good that's come out of this pandemic, but I think that the compulsion to review the state of the world, how power is arranged, how environment is responded to, the fact that climate change is now a mainline conversation again, the fact that, you know, rights is at the center of our conversation, that gender, intersectionality, these are words that have returned to mainstream conversations. It's a weird thing to say, but we have the pandemic to actually thank for that. It may never have happened without that. Thank you. It's been extraordinary, even for me, who thought a lot of my ideas were sorted. I'm discovering even in your late 40s, you're still confused about so many things. Karuna, Sanjina, Manvi, and Aditi, it's been brilliant listening to you. Thank you so much. I know our audience is going to love this conversation. It's been my favorite one so far, for sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.